You're tuned into the Spot Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, the Spurs went 2-1 this past week with games against the Thunder, Bucks, and Timberwolves. The outside shooting is slowly improving, and the trade deadline is less than 3 weeks away. Welcome back to another episode of the Spot Up Pod. My last episode came out on Monday, so there's only been 3 games that we have to review for this past week, so let's jump right into these games. So let's go back to Tuesday. The Spurs are on the road at Oklahoma City. The Thunder were favored by 8.5 points in this game. There was no Devin Vassell for San Antonio, and the Oklahoma City Thunder were without Isaiah Hartenstein and Lou Dort. This was basically a close game in the first half, but then the Thunder went on a 22-7 run in the last 6 minutes of the third quarter to lead by 19 points going into the fourth. The Spurs did get as close as 12 points in the fourth, but OKC expanded their lead and they ended up winning by 21 points. That became the largest loss of the season for the Spurs and their first loss of the season to Oklahoma City. So the Spurs still do lead the Thunder in the season series 3-1. The final matchup will take place on February 4th in San Antonio. Looking at the math game from that matchup, the Thunder had a big advantage in the 2-point scoring, winning that area by 20 points, and then also they won the free throw line by 7 points. The top 3 players from this game, SGA ends up with 34 points on the night, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. He finally got to the free throw line more extensively against the Spurs than he had done in the prior matchups, going 11 of 13 from the foul line. Stephon Castle has a good night for San Antonio with 20 points, 7 rebounds, and 8 assists. And then Jalen Williams also finally had one of his best games against the Spurs in this season, ending up with 20 points against the Spurs in this matchup. Next, let's go to Thursday. The Spurs are back home hosting the Milwaukee Bucks for the first time this season. The Spurs were favored by 7.5 points. There was no Devin Vassell again for this game. So this game became close in the first quarter, but then the Spurs went on a 26-6 run in the second quarter to lead by as many as 16 points. Then the Spurs put away this game basically in the third quarter. They come out in the third and rout the Bucks 40-16 in the quarter. So they end up leading by as many as 39 points in the game. And basically most of the rotation players were out for the fourth quarter. So the game, the reserves, couldn't hold the lead. And so they held the lead, but they couldn't keep it substantially high. And so they ended up winning by 18 points, which is still, a very easily comfortable win for San Antonio. So the Spurs, and looking at the math game, the Spurs won the 2-point battle by 14 points and free throw line by 7 points. And they barely lost the 3-point battle by just 3 points. The final game against the Milwaukee Bucks will take place not until close to the end of the season on March 28th. Right now, it looks like Giannis will continue to be on the Bucks by that point, but again, we'll see what the trade deadline coming up here in 3 weeks. As far as who are the top 3 players from this game, Stephon Castle had a great game for San Antonio with 19 points, 10 assists to 0 turnovers. He ends up recording his 7th double-double of the season. Victor Wembanyama starts and ends up with 22 points, 10 rebounds, 2 blocks in just 22 minutes of play because of the big lead that the Spurs had in the fourth. And he actually shot very well from 3, going 5 of 6 from outside. And then Giannis basically carried the Bucks as much as he could, ends up with 21 points and 5 rebounds. One thing to note is that the Spurs tried different defenders on him. Wemby played against him early in the first quarter, but then Wemby got hurt and came back into the game later in the game. So when Wemby went out, it ended up being Stephon Castle and Keldon Johnson who took their chances of guarding Giannis for big chunks of the game as well. Now let's go to the most recent game for the Spurs, which took place on Saturday versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Spurs were favored by 4.5 points in this game. There was no Devin Vassell again for San Antonio. The Wolves, I do want to note, were on the second night of back-to-back after a close game in Houston. They were without Rudy Gobert. Anthony Edwards didn't play against the Rockets, so he was fresh coming into this game. But Naz Reid did play in the game, but he got hurt 5 minutes into the game and didn't return. So basically, the Wolves were without 2 of their big 4 there, without Gobert and Naz, but they did have Randall and Anthony Edwards. So the Spurs, it looked like it was going to be another one of those nights like the one against the Bucks. The Spurs came out, on fire in the second quarter. Wemby put together a 20-point quarter on his own, and the Spurs basically went into halftime with a 25-point lead. But then, as the Wolves have done against the Spurs in their prior 2 matchups, the Wolves came out and won the third and fourth quarters and made it a ball game. So in the third quarter, the Wolves make their comeback, outscoring the Spurs 40-27. So the Spurs only have a 12-point lead going into the final quarter. In the fourth, the Wolves did retake the lead momentarily by as many as 3 points. The game goes down at crunch time, and then it became the Anthony Edwards versus Wemby dueling contest there in the fourth quarter. And ends up with 26 points in the fourth quarter. Wemby ends up with 12 points in this game. And so let's just kind of break down the final minute for this game with the Spurs leading by 2. So first, Ant has the ball. He gets doubled. He passes to Jon Berenger, the rookie, who was getting a lot of minutes with Rudy Gobert out, who finds Dante DiVincenzo in the corner for a 3. So the Spurs are only up by 1. Next possession, Wemby responds with a 21-foot pick and pop mid-range jumper off a pass from De'Aaron Fox. So now the Spurs are up by 3. Next up, the Spurs make a key stop. Julius Randle drives in, finds Jon Berenger in the dunker spot. Jon tries to go reverse layup against Wemby, but nope, Wemby blocks the shot, and so the Spurs get a key stop. I do want to note that in the 2-minute report on Sunday that came out, the Wolves, not the Wolves, the NBA did say that Jon was actually fouled, but again, it wasn't called during the game, so that was a mistake by the refs in that game, so the Spurs end up getting that stop. Then on the next possession, Fox drives, finds Harrison Barnes in the corner, who passes to Julian Champagnie. Champagnie drives in, finds Keldon Johnson open from the right arc, finds Keldon. Keldon patiently just gets that ball, puts it up, ready to go. He said he was ready to shoot that shot if it got to him. Sure enough, he makes it. He drills the 3-pointer. The Spurs now have a 4-point lead, and I do want to note that was a big shot for Keldon, and it's a good sign that he's not afraid of these pressure situations, especially because a lot of these players who have been on the Spurs for a number of years, like Keldon, Devin Vassell, some of these guys, they've never been in the playoffs, so that's going to be, we're going to see how they shape up there in the playoffs. But again, these close games right now are a good sign that Keldon is not afraid to take that type of shot. So then after Keldon makes that 3-pointer to give the Spurs a 4-point lead, Ant responds with the corner step-back 3 that was contested by De'Aaron Fox. And so now the Spurs are only up by 1. The Wolves then foul Fox intentionally. He goes 2 of 2 from the line. The Spurs are up by 3. Then Ant gets fouled and goes 1 of 2 from the free throw line. So now the Spurs have a 2-point lead. Then Julian Champagnie gets the rebound when Ant misses his second free throw. And he actually goes to the line, but he misses both of his free throws. However, Wemby, being the tallest player on the floor, comes up with a key offensive rebound, and he gets fouled with just 2 seconds left. Then Victor goes to the line, makes the first free throw to give the Spurs a 3-point lead, and then he basically tries to kill the clock by kind of just like rushing a shot against the backboard of the rim. But the Wolves actually get a handle on that ball, and they end up putting up a half-court heave. They end up missing, and so the Spurs narrowly hold on for the 3-point win against the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Wolves did end up winning the season series against the Spurs 2-1, where basically it's kind of been the same theme where like the Spurs are the better team in the first half, then the Wolves make those comebacks in the second half. Luckily for San Antonio, they held on enough with that 25-point lead to withstand that run by Minnesota in the second half. So again, if these two teams do match up again, it won't be into the playoffs in the event that they both end up in the same kind of matchup against each other. So again, that's just going to be, if they were to meet in the playoffs, that would be an epic series. We see obviously just like how we saw Ant and Wemby kind of carrying their teams there down the stretch. That would be a really good matchup if both teams were to meet at some point in the playoffs. As far as who are the top 3 players in this game, of course, I got to mention Ant, who ends up with a career-high 55 points, made 9 of 16 threes. I do want to note that the Spurs did have Stephon Castle guarding him for segments of the game, and Castle ended up fouling out. Castle also had to guard Julius Randle a lot in this game, too. So, again, that was a tough defensive matchup for him guarding those two players. And then they also had Fox guarding Ant mainly out on the perimeter if it wasn't Castle. Wemby, he raises his level as well in this game, ends up with 39 points in the 9. Again, that 20-point second quarter really stood out. 9 rebounds, 2 blocks in 31 minutes. That's key right there, the 31 minutes, because he hadn't played more than 30 minutes since November 14th. That was the last time he ever played 30 minutes in a game. So again, that's a very good sign that Wemby's no longer on the injured list, nor is he, maybe these minute restrictions are finally coming off against him, where he's actually finally getting over 30 minutes in a game. And I do want to note that Wemby went 4 of 9 from 3. So again, starting to see a little bit more of an increase in his 3-point volume, as I'll talk about here a little bit later. And then De'Aaron Fox had a good game for the Spurs with 25 points, 12 assists, which makes this his 4th double-double of the season. So Vegas said the Spurs should have gone 2-1 this past week. They did just that, and my prediction ended up going 3 for 3. I thought they would lose to OKC, but then beat the Bucks and the Wolves, and sure enough, that's exactly what they did. Where are the Spurs now through 42 games? They are 29-13, tied with the Denver Nuggets for the 2nd seed out west, but because the Spurs hold the tiebreaker right now, they are considered second out west as of Sunday afternoon. The Spurs are well over their Vegas over-under. They were supposed to win about 44 games this year. So far, they're on pace to win anywhere from 53 to 56 wins. They have a 99% chance of making the playoffs, a 51% chance of going to the second round, a 16% chance of getting to the conference finals, and a 3.6 chance of getting to the finals. And finally, a 1.7% chance of winning the finals per ESPN's BPI model. The Spurs did play two good teams this past week in the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Wolves. So I do want to mention what their record is against those top tier teams, those teams that are 600 and above this season. The Spurs are now 9-4 with wins over Boston, OKC, Denver, one win against Minnesota, a win against Houston, and two wins against the Lakers. And their only losses are one loss to the Thunder, two losses to the Wolves, and one loss to the Lakers. All right, so now for our second topic, I want to go through the outside shooting slowly improving. So I do want to mention that it's a very small sample size. It's only been 4 games, but finally, I mean, you've heard me here on the podcast. If you've been following my writing, that's all I've been talking about for like the last 2 or 3 weeks is, the Spurs are in the shooting slump. They can't make threes. They're shooting like 20% almost every night. And so now they're finally, it looks like that shooting slump might be over finally, and they're slowly going in the right direction, trending upward. So let's just look at these last 4 games for the team. So again, it's a very small sample size, just 4 games. So it starts off in that first game against Minnesota when they lost. They at least shot 34% from 3, so that's been better than what they had been shooting before. Then in that loss to Oklahoma City, they end up shooting 35%. So again, just a percentage better, but at least it's going upward. Then again, the Bucks, they caught fire, making 43% of their threes, which is a big reason for that blowout. It was their first time cracking 40% from 3 since December 23rd when they won in double digits against Oklahoma City. And then finally, against the Wolves, they shot good from 3 as well, making 39% of their threes. So looking at the individual players of who's remained, who's getting hot right now in these last 4 games, and who's kind of still where they were or struggling or maybe just making some smaller growth here. So let's look at the high volume shooters. So in the last 4 games, Julian Champagnie is a coach still starting for Devin Vassell. He's taking 6.5 threes per game, making 42% of them. So Champagnie's doing great here. Wemby, as I mentioned earlier, has seen an uptick in his 3-point volume. He's now taking 6.3 attempts, which are much more than usual for him. And he's on fire right now, making 48% of his threes in these last 4 games. Harrison Barnes is taking 5.3 per game attempts, and it's not where you would expect from Barnes. He's at 33% right now in these last 4 games, but at least it's better than where he was, like it was in that 20% range. So again, Harrison Barnes is at least shooting 33%. He's starting to get a few to go in each night, and then De'Aaron Fox's 3-point percentage is slowly ticking upward. He's taking 5 threes attempts per game and making 35%. Again, much better for him. He was shooting about 19-20% during that slump. So again, 35% is looking a lot better for Fox. As far as the low volume shooters, Keldon Johnson takes 4.3 attempts per game right now, making 47%, again on fire, hit that crucial one against Minnesota in crunch time. Dylan Harper's still struggling. He's taking 3.5 attempts per game, only making 21% of them in these last 4, which kind of matches where he's been in that slump. And then Stephon Castle has been on fire. He's only taking three attempts per game. And again, defenses leave him wide open. They back off of him. They go under him on screens. But he's making 50% of his shots in these last 4 games. So again, that's just a small recap of what's going on lately from outside. And the hope is that the trend continues to go upward or kind of flatlines there in that 35% range, which is where the Spurs were before that shooting slump came into place. Next up, let's talk about the upcoming trade deadline. So the trade deadline is now a little less than 3 weeks away on Thursday, February 5th. With how surprisingly good the Spurs are this season already, again, being second out west, on pace to 53 to 56 wins. Again, their name hasn't been mentioned much in the rumor mill because, again, they're not one of those teams that looks like they need a lot of needs right now via trade because of how good they are. And so the latest reporting we've had comes from Jake Fisher over on the Stein line, where he mentioned the Spurs with 2 other teams that are doing very well this season, the Denver Nuggets and Oklahoma City Thunder. He said this about those 3 teams. He said, little tinkering, by contrast, is expected from OKC, San Antonio, and Denver. So basically, this was about Fisher writing about how the Lakers and have been looking for a 3D wing in the trade market, and so have the Minnesota Timberwolves been looking for a point guard. And so when he's talking about some of those top teams out west, he's saying that the Spurs, Thunder and Denver don't seem to be those teams that are very active right now, in the trade area. So again, because of how good the Spurs are right now, again, I don't see that there's going to be a lot of urgency to make these splashing moves there at the trade deadline. But again, that's today as of January 18th. I think maybe had the slump continued, the shooting slump, maybe they get a little bit more aggressive. But again, right now that it's kind of starting to come back into place, they're shooting. It doesn't look like it's going to be a huge move for San Antonio right now as of January 18th that I'm recording this episode. I do think, though, that they could make some moves on the margins, maybe adding an extra shooter off the bench, there in the reserve lineups, or maybe trying to get some draft capital for Jeremy Sohan, since we know that he's out of the rotation and he's also going to be a restricted free agent after the Spurs did not extend his contract this past October. So what do the Spurs have going into the trade deadline? So they have Sohan's $7 million contract. They also have Kelly Olynyk's $13 million expiring contract that they could either use for an individual player, send one of those players out and get a player back, or they can combine those two salaries to get a player with a larger contract. Zach Lowe kind of mentioned this strategy on one of his earlier podcasts, within the last month, or it might have been December, that's kind of what the Spurs might do is use Sohan and Olynyk's contracts together if they do go out and make a trade. As far as draft capital, the Spurs have a lot of draft capital. They have 7 upcoming first-round picks in the next 7 years with 3 pick swaps. They also have anywhere from 15 to 17 second-rounders in the next seven years. So as far as those valuable picks, again, I don't think the Spurs would want to move any of those at this deadline. And so when I talk about the valuable picks, it's the Atlanta 2027 first, it's the 2030 Minnesota or Dallas first-round pick, and it's also the 2031 Sacramento Kings first-round pick. So again, I think those are the 3 most valuable picks that the Spurs have going forward in the next 7 years. And so again, I think that they would hold on to those picks, not move them in any kind of deal up until this deadline, and maybe see how they finish out in the playoffs. And, if they need to go out and make a splashing move, then they use those picks maybe for that kind of move, in the future, maybe in the offseason rather than this coming season. Now, something to mention about the Spurs' own first-round picks, like I mentioned, they have a lot going forward, but those picks are going to start losing their value very quickly because we see how good already this team is in just Wemby's third year. So going forward, Wemby, Fox, Castle, Harper, all these young players, going forward, this team is expected to be, a contender going forward. And so the value of these picks is going to continue to these picks are going to lose their value basically, end up picking in that 25 to 30 range going forward, just depending on where the Spurs finish each season. So again, as far as the Spurs' picks, their own picks going forward, those don't look as appealing to teams maybe going forward. Now, on Friday, I did write a piece called 2026 Trade Deadline Players Who Fit with the Spurs over on the spotupshot.com if you want to check that out. And so I didn't put any hypothetical trades together. What my goal was here was just to kind of look at all 29 team rosters. I'm looking for mainly, mostly three-point shooters, so high-volume shooters, shoot a decent percentage right now this season. Then looking at their contracts, how much years are left on their deals, and then looking at trying to be realistic with is this player gettable? Basically there's some players who would obviously fit with the Spurs, but maybe their teams are doing very well, and you just can't see those teams giving up their players. So basically that was kind of my mindset making this list, is kind of who might be gettable, and mainly it's a lot of players on teams that are struggling, teams that are below 500 and don't look like they're in the playoff picture. So I mainly looked at two types of players that are shooters who could come off the bench, play at that 10th spot that's open right now next to Dylan Harper, Julian Champagnie, Keldon Johnson, and Luke Cornett. Is there a reserve shooter who could come in and fill actual minutes there, not just get spot minutes like how Lindy Waters does, Jeremy Sohan, Kelly Olynyk, Carter Bryant. I'm just trying to see if there's anybody out there that can maybe get that 10th spot, those 10 spot minutes. Then the more drastic move would be for the Spurs to actually look for someone to replace Harrison Barnes in the starting lineup. And again, I don't think that's the approach they're going to take, because I think that Barnes' numbers are starting to uptick slowly. Or even if they wanted to make a change, I think they could look at, once Devin Vassell comes back, maybe adding Julian Champagnie to the starting lineup and having Barnes come off the bench. So again, I don't think they're going to be, they're not desperate right now where they're going to go out and make an aggressive move to try to get someone who could start just based on where they're at. I think they want to finish out the season, go into the playoffs, and see what their needs are based on their playoff outcome. So I'm going to first begin by looking at those reserve shooters off the bench. I'm going to rank these 9. I had 9 players in my piece that I mentioned. So again, read it on the spotupshot.com. And I have 9 players, and I want to just rank them, basically on how I feel are players that are either most gettable or maybe the best fit this season. And I'm going to begin with players who have either a year or less coming up on their contracts. So again, short-term moves here for the Spurs in that reserve unit. I think that the first player I mentioned was that I think ranking these players is Luke Kennard, 6'5" wing, $11 million left. I mean, $11 million this year. He's an upcoming free agent. So again, you could just basically get him for this upcoming playoff run. Atlanta is a team that is struggling right now. They're kind of right there in that play-in picture, but they do have a losing record. So again, because he's a free agent, I think you can that he is gettable right now at this deadline. So again, Luke Kennard might be an option. Then there's Gary Trent Jr. on the Bucks, 6'5" guard / wing. He's only making $3.6 million. 1 year left on his contract with the player option, so maybe he ends up opting out. So again, because of where the Bucks are, right now they are still trying to get into the East playoffs or at least making the play-in, but they are continuing to lose and they're really struggling as we saw them get blown out by San Antonio and I think it was Minnesota or somebody else blew them out recently. And so because he does provide that one skill that Milwaukee really needs, I'm not sure how much they would want to let him go, but his minutes have reduced a little bit. His shooting's also not where it was in the past few years, so maybe he's more gettable. And again, it's a low cost move for San Antonio. Gary Trent Jr. There's Ayo Dosunmu from the Chicago Bulls, 6'5", $7.5 million this year. He's an upcoming free agent as well. Bulls are kind of like the Bucks, where they're kind of right there on that play-in verge, but they also have a losing record. Dosunmu, the only concern for me is that he's more so a guard who, he shoots well from three, has a pretty decent volume, but he also likes to, penetrate, drive, and kick. But that's an issue when you're on a Spurs team where you already have Fox, you have Castle, you have Harper with the ball in their hands, plus you have Wemby, creating a lot of the offense. So that's why I'm not so sure he's the perfect fit, just because of again, he's more so a guard who likes to drive in as well as shoot the three ball. But Dosunmu might be an option there. Then the last two are more so, I would say, the out of these players in the 1 year range, I think these are a little bit these two players are a little bit tougher to get, or maybe I'm not as high on getting these two players. So the first player is Keon Ellis, 6'3" guard on the Sacramento Kings, $2.3 million this year, but then he's an upcoming free agent. Again, he's another guard, so it's a little bit, even though he's not like Dosunmu where he's going to be driving in a lot. He's more so that 3-and-D kind of player. I think out of all these players I'm about to mention, he's one of the better defenders. But right now, from what I read in the recent rumor mill, the Kings aren't looking to move him, or if they're going to move him, they want you to take back a bad contract, like or not a bad contract, but someone like Malik Monk or somebody else that they're trying to move off their team. Or there was a report that I had read that said that they want a late first rounder, and again, I don't think you give up a first rounder for Keon Ellis, who's going to be an upcoming free agent, which means there's no guarantee he even resigns with you. So again, because of his contract situation and the fact that the Kings still value him highly, I don't think that that's why I have him fourth here in these rankings. The last player is Klay Thompson on the Dallas Mavericks, 6'6" shooter. Again, because of his contract, I'm not as high on him either. $16.6 million this year. He only has 1 year left on his deal. The Mavs are, do have a losing record. But again, with Klay's situation too, I'm not sure how happy he would be in a Spurs team where maybe he doesn't have guaranteed minutes every night. At least with Dallas, I know he's coming off the bench, but he's at least getting those guaranteed minutes every night. And he likes his role, getting to be one of those players who can kind of let it go from with his shot selection. And so again, because of his contract situation too, $6.6 million, you might be able to get him for Olynyk, or you might have to send out two players for him. So again, I'm not as high either on Klay. For me as a big Klay fan over the years, I would just be excited to see his shot form every night as just a person who watches basketball. But again, he's not quite where he was in his days with the Splash Brothers. So that's why I have him ranked fifth here in terms of these five players with the contracts of 1 year or less to kind of fill that reserve shooting role on the Spurs. Next, let's go to players again in that reserve shooting role. With 2 or more years left on their contract. Again, these players I'm not as high on, just because I don't like the fact that for the Spurs they have they already have Fox's extension that kicked in. They're going to have Wemby's extension coming up whenever he signs a max contract. Then they're going to have Stephon Castle and Dylan Harper coming forward in the next few years as well. So again, I don't like the idea of adding 2 or more years to the cap sheet, just because it kind of ties you in a little bit, even though these players still could get moved. So let's just begin with the players, how I have them ranked here. First player is Svi Mykhailiuk out of the Utah Jazz, 6'7" forward or wing, making $3.6 million per year. He has 2 years left on his deal, non-guaranteed in the third year, and then or second year, and then team option in the third year. Again, Mykhailiuk, he's not in the rumor mill. Again, he's a starter right now for Utah. Again, I'm not even sure how much they want to move him. Maybe they like him on his low value contract right now, but maybe he's a player who's gettable for the Spurs. And again, you have more optionality with the fact that his contract really isn't guaranteed until after this past year. Then there's Corey Kispert, who just got moved from the Wizards to the Hawks. 6'6" wing shooter, making $13.9 million this year. He has 3 years left on his deal with the last year has a team option. So again, you're getting tied down more so in the money. He's going to provide that outside shooting for you, but again, defense may not be there as much. So again, because of the number of years, I'm not as high on getting Kispert. Then there's Sam Hauser, 6'7" wing out of the Boston Celtics, making $10 million per year, but does have a guaranteed 3 years left on his deal. Again, I'm not sure how gettable Hauser is at the moment. I know in the offseason, there was a report that the Spurs, right around the draft time, when they were trying to look to possibly move the 14th pick that turned into Carter Bryant before the selection was made, there was a report that the Spurs were talking to the Celtics about Hauser, possibly for that 14th pick. And then also there was all these reports, in the offseason when Boston was trying to reduce payroll, that Hauser was one of those players on the trade block. But now, looking today in mid-January, the fact that the Celtics have been really good, surprisingly good, a top 3 team out east, looking like a contender if Jason Tatum is able to come back and play at the levels that he's played at. I'm not sure how urgent the Celtics want to move Hauser now that they're actually really good again. And so again, that's why I have him third here, more so because of the Celtics situation with him. And then finally, there's Santi Aldama, 7-footer out of the Memphis Grizzlies, $18.4 million, just re-signed with the Grizzlies this past off season. He has 2 years left on his deal, but the second year is a team option. Again, Aldama doesn't look like he's available right now. That's why I have him here fourth. I do think he would be a really good fit, even if you had to move 2 players for him, like Olynyk and Sohan for him. Even with the 2 years left in his contract, I just think he would be a great fit. But again, right now he doesn't look like he's available. I do wonder if the Grizzlies do end up moving Ja here in the next 3 weeks, and then they just go for a total rebuild, wanting to rebuild around Cedric Coward, Zach Edey, and Jalen Wells, then maybe they put Jaren Jackson up available for trade. Maybe they start taking calls on Santi Aldama, and then I do wonder if maybe that the Spurs should make the phone call to Memphis if Aldama were to become available in the next 3 weeks. But again, I have him ranked the lowest here because I don't think he's available at the moment. All right, now looking at starting forwards, again, in the event the Spurs want to look at a player to replace Harrison Barnes' starting lineup, again, there's only one player who looks available right now, and that's Michael Porter Jr. of the Brooklyn Nets, who's off to a really good season. Listening to some of the national media, he might actually make the All-Star reserve team this year. 6'10", shooting forward, played, of course, with the Denver Nuggets, won a title with the Nuggets, making $38 million this year on a max contract. He has 1 year left on his deal. Again, because of where the Spurs are at right now and the fact that the Nets can really raise their price right now because of how good he's playing right now with the Nets having a breakout season, getting all those opportunities in Brooklyn and, might be an all-star. Again, the Nets are going to have a high asking price for him, which is, they should do. So again, that's why I don't think that the Spurs are going to be one of those teams that are going to be super aggressive in going after a player like Porter Jr. Just because, the asking price from Brooklyn and the fact that I think the Spurs want to see what they have right now, even if it's Barnes starting or maybe it's like Julian Champagnie starting going into the playoffs. So again, that's why I don't think the Spurs will be active in going after Michael Porter Jr. At this time. All right, these last 4 players who could be starting level players, again, they're at the forward spot. Are these players I'm putting in the category of you hope they become available. So again, according to the latest rumors, these players are not available at the moment on January 18th that I'm recording this episode. The first player who, of course, I think is the ideal fit for the Spurs would be great is Trey Murphy III of the New Orleans Pelicans. 6'8" wing, making $25 million this year. Great contract, 3 years left on his deal. Again, the latest reporting from Chris Haynes of Amazon Prime was that the Pelicans have been telling teams that Murphy, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, Derek Queen, and Jeremiah Fears will all make it on the Pelicans roster past the trade deadline. They will not be moved. Plus, there was an ESPN report recently that said that the Pelicans have been rebuffing calls on Murphy. 3 weeks to go. It looks like the Pelicans' stance is that they are not going to move Murphy. If that stance changes, though, in the next 3 weeks, I do think the Spurs need to get on the phone as quick as possible. And I think he's more gettable, with multiple first-round picks, but maybe not those most valuable picks that I mentioned earlier, in this segment. The next player who would be a great fit for the Spurs, but again, not available at the moment, is Lauri Markkanen of the Utah Jazz, 7-footer, forward, making $46.9 million this year, has 3 years left on his deal. Again, Markkanen would be a great fit, but with him, the difference between him and Murphy is that I think that Utah would have a very high asking price for him, where they might want one of those future pick swaps that the Spurs have that are very valuable. And again, he's not available at the moment, according to all the reporting. So again, that's why I just think, marking him is more like a pipe dream at this time. Again, this is one of those players who's not available. Herb Jones, also of the Pelicans, 6'7" wing, $13.9 million contract this year, 4 years left on his deal with the player option the final year. The amount of first round picks would be a lot less than what it would be for Murphy. But again, right now the stance from the Pelicans is that he's not available. Again, he's not going to really address your shooting need if you're the Spurs, but he just takes your defense to another level, being out there with his length and athleticism and his ability to kind of cut and, get out on the break and things like that. So again, Herb Jones will be a good fit, but he's not available. And then finally, Again, this is a player more so to watch in the event he becomes available. Would be just taking a chance, maybe looking at, Jaren Jackson Jr. from Memphis, 6'10" big forward, making $35 million this year, then has a 4-year deal coming up, 4 years left on his deal with a player option in the final year. Again, there's been no reporting that he's available, but there has been reporting that teams have been calling about him, though the Grizzlies look like they want to still build around him. But again, if Ja gets traded soon in the next 3 weeks, and then Memphis wants to go into a total rebuild mode, who knows if Jackson becomes available? And I just think it'll be interesting. The defense, him and Wemby out there, they both protect the interior, really well. They also, can switch out on the perimeter very well for bigs. And then the offense would be a question, but Jackson can at least spread the floor alongside Wemby in making 3-pointers. But again, unless he becomes available, I don't think the Spurs should put in a call for Jaren Jackson Jr. So again, those were the 9 players I wrote about over on the spotupshot.com. If you want to read that piece, again, I have more details, with their numbers, more details on their contract situations and why I think they would be good fits, etc. But I just kind of wanted to rank them here in this episode of the Spot Up Pod, and I will actually be putting more hypothetical trade packages together this coming week with some of these players, especially more the realistic, players in terms of gettable players, I would say, here at the trade deadline coming up. Let's keep going. All right, so now before I close out this episode, let's look at the upcoming 4 games for the Spurs this week. So in the last 10 games, the Spurs are 6-4. They have the 19th ranked offense and 4th ranked defense. So that's kind of the numbers I'm using as looking at all these teams in their last 10. So let's go to Monday. The Spurs are at home hosting the Utah Jazz. Devin Vassell will be out for this game, according to the Spurs' injury report, and then Lauri Markkanen is also going to be out for Utah. The Jazz are struggling, though, since beating the Spurs the last time. They're 2-8 in their last 10. They have the 23rd ranked offense and the 30th ranked defense. Because the Jazz don't have Markkanen, and because the Spurs have been playing a little bit better here against Minnesota and Milwaukee, especially on the offensive end, is starting to look better now. I am going to say that the San Antonio wins, although Keontae George, of course, is a player to watch for Utah, who played very well against the Spurs. Then on Tuesday, the Spurs are going on a back-to-back to Houston to play the Rockets. It'll be the second meeting between the two teams this season. The Rockets are kind of like the Spurs, stumbling a little bit, but also, still winning. So they're 5-5 in their last 10. They have the 20th ranked offense. Their offense is also struggling, but they do have a very good defense, 8th ranked defense in the last 10. So because it's on the second night of a back-to-back, I am going to say that Houston wins this game. Then on Thursday, the Spurs go on the road to Utah to play the Jazz again this week. And so I've already mentioned how the Jazz are struggling, yada, yada, yada. So I'm going to go and say the Spurs win this game. And then on Sunday, the Spurs return home to host the New Orleans Pelicans, who the Spurs have defeated multiple times this season. The Pelicans are, struggling right now. They're 2-8 in their last 10 games. They have the 24th ranked offense and 28th ranked defense. So I do think this should be a Spurs win. Although I will say the Pelicans always put up a fight against the Spurs, so maybe it won't be an easy win, but it should be a Spurs win nonetheless. So this looks like a very favorable week for the Spurs. So at worst, they should go at no worse than 3-1 this week. So we'll see if that's my prediction. 3-1. We'll see if they do that. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening and have a great day.